Life is filled with unique experiences that are shaped and blended by race, ethnicity, and culture. This thing called life is a space where we can share our experiences in order to learn, grow, and empower change. Our logo was created by Marianne Luis. Thank you, Marianne. And the music you hear at the beginning and end is by Coma Media from Pixbay.com. Feel free to do a little dance. Okay, here we go. So, I'm ready to start. I have got my tea, black tea. I've been trying to kick back on caffeine. Go me. Just had some halal, some chicken lamb over rice. Love it. One of my favorite things. Also, I'm probably one of the worst vegetarians ever, and that's okay too. I do my best. I try to buy most of the stuff, if not everything, at the grocery store, plant-based and like non-dairy. But every now and then, I just want a little bit of cheese, like a little bit of turkey, maybe some chicken and lamb or fish. Not perfect, and that's okay. But yeah, today started very well. Cleaned the bathroom. That was a success. It was disgusting. And partially why it got that way was because I didn't do anything about it. Gotta own up to our things, right? We gotta own up to our part in things. But it's clean now, so that's great. And so I think the first thing I kind of want to mention is sort of, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to sort of create this podcast? Well, a big reason is I genuinely love connecting with people, and I feel like podcast is a great platform and a great way to connect with one another. I also love sharing stories. I love listening to stories, listening to other people's experiences. It's in part why I the first 3 episodes shared my experience going through addiction and recovery, and shared experiences and sharing experiences can connect one another. And so that's what I would like for this podcast to be either centered around or a big part of. I know when we share our stories, it can be a powerful experience, not only for the person that's sharing them, but for the people that are listening. Although our stories are undoubtedly unique, there are similarities. And when we share our stories, we tend to let go. We let go of fear and judgment, and that can kind of open us up and change our awareness. And that can be a powerful experience to let go. And for those who are listening to stories, listening to someone else's experience, that can also be a powerful experience, whether you yourself, maybe you hear your story in someone else's, or maybe you know someone who experienced something similar. And that can provide us a sense of relief, a sense that we're not alone, and that in itself is a powerful experience as well. So, that's what I want a big part of this podcast to be. But for now, I'm going to share, I guess, a little bit of my experience, and it's about learning and challenging different thoughts and challenging different ways of viewing myself in the world. And so the one thing I'm going to chat about, which is important to me, is white supremacy culture. So for those of you who are like, yes, Dan, please, talk about it. Yes, I'm going to. And thank you for listening. Also, for those of you who are like, what, we do not want to hear about white supremacy culture. It's not a thing, false news or fake news. Well, then I dedicate this episode to you. There's an opportunity. it's an opportunity to learn and to grow. Again, to challenge old ways of viewing things, letting go of old ways of being and um, old values. So that's what I'm going to chat about. And so, what is it? What is white supremacy culture? So it's culture, right? It is a culture that has a set of values, and these values maintain and perpetuate a certain way of life, right? It maintains a hierarchy, um, and make sure that there's order, right? And the order is, white males, white Christian males, sort of are at the top, and everyone else is, so to speak, at the bottom. And that's what white supremacy culture tries to maintain, and it does it by its values. It does it by passing down these values from generation to generation. So, what are these values? Great question. I'm going to tell you some of them, and I'm going to be reading some of this from I think it's Okun, Okun, from 2001, and it was the title of it is White Supremacy Culture. So some of the values of white supremacy culture are fear of open conflict, power hoarding, worship of the written word. So basically, if it's not in a book or it's not written down, it doesn't exist. It's not a thing. Right to comfort. So people with power and privilege have the right to feel emotionally comfortable wherever they are. Only one right way. So that there's a right way and a wrong way, and that's sort of the view. How to view not only the world but how to view yourself. So whenever you view the world in a certain way, that's the same way you view yourself. Paternalism, I'm the only one, sort of goes with individualism. This world is competitive, so you kind of have to focus on yourself, and it's you. Objectivity, defensiveness, perfectionism. Anything less than perfect is unacceptable. So don't mess up. Don't mess up. A sense of urgency. So go. The faster and more efficient. We got to do everything now. Quantity over quality. That can, when I hear quantity over quality, I sort of am reminded of the Industrial Revolution and the invention of what was the not the conveyor, but kind of the conveyor belt, but the assembly line, right? So that invention, sort of let's make as much stuff as humanly possible, right, to make more profits. Progress is bigger and more. It's huge. That is my Donald Trump impression. So the more we do, the better we're doing. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, either or thinking. That's a big one that I will mention later. It's sort of like things can either be viewed either like this or that, good or bad, right or wrong. And so I'm gonna put this, up on. For those of you who are listening, I'm also putting the video on YouTube. I'm gonna try to connect this little pamphlet, this little brochure that puts these, has these different values, but also, what do we sacrifice when we hold on to each one of these values. So we've got these values, right, and they get passed on. They get passed on in many different ways. They get passed on music, media, art. They get passed on just through family and friends. They get passed on in just life in general. And most of the time we don't know that we're and this is for, white people, but for, anyone who's listening, sometimes we don't realize that we're getting these values passed on to us until we, challenge them and become aware of them. So these values get passed on. And what these values tend to do, in my opinion, is these values create a lens, right? a lens at which you view the world, you view yourself, and how you feel like others view you. Um, and that lens is called racial identity, right? Um, Identity and as it relates to race. And what these values tend to do is it can narrow our awareness. Um, so think of, something that comes to my mind is, horses have those like blinders on, right? So you have these blinders on, and the more and more we hold on to, the more and more we value these values, our awareness can get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Until you're like, you just seem to not recognize certain things. And that's what I feel like a part of when we kind of see other people, they're like almost ignoring the obvious. And a part of me feels like it's because just the awareness can be so narrow, and that's right, that's harmful to society, and that's harmful to the self, to the person, right? Because if we have a narrow awareness of the world, we also have a narrow awareness of ourselves. And so why do I feel like that this creates a limited awareness, and why do I feel like this can narrow our awareness? Well, so I mentioned either or thinking, and this is sort of like the best way I can describe why I think this is something that happens. So when we view things in either or, this or that, good or bad, right or wrong, those are limits, right? It's limited. It can either be this thing or that thing. And instead of viewing things as a progression, right? And so this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, instead of this is learning, this is growing, this is progress, this is change. And when we view things in that from that perspective, we're both acknowledging where we are at, and also that we are going in a particular direction at the very same time, right? So it's not either or, it's not this or that, right? It's this continuation. So when we think in that way, when we view things as good or bad, right or wrong, this or that, it limits, right? It limits us. And when we limit the way we think of the world, again, I sort of said this before, whatever we view the world, however we view the world, we view ourselves that same way. So if we are valuing good or bad, right or wrong, this or that, this limited perspective, we are viewing ourselves, right? And that can cause all sorts of things, anxiety and depression, right? Those are sort of the two ones that come to my mind. And that could be harmful. And that's why white supremacy culture affects everyone, right? It's obvious that it affects people of color, black people, indigenous people, all sorts of race, ethnicity, and cultures that are oppressed by white supremacy culture. But it also affects the people that are perpetuating it. It affects white people, right? And so my hope is that white folks can realize that by navigating their racial identity, that they realize that they benefit from it. And so that's the, and also like the other part that I wanted to mention is, so we have white supremacy culture. We have these values that are passed on that limits our views of the world, that limits our views of ourselves, and it just perpetuates and passed on over and over. And this happens again, like in all facets of life. It happens, like it can be passed on, and messages are being sent, whether it's intentionally, unintentionally, covertly, overtly, consciously, unconsciously. These values are being sent like every single day, over and over and over. And that's what it can be difficult to sort of escape that when you're sort of being told the same message all of the time. Um, and what this creates is privilege, right? And oppression. Those two things happen at the very same time, right? So we don't have um, privilege without oppression. We don't have oppression without privilege. Um, and I'm gonna try to think of a sort of an example of where this, where it can be found or seen or heard. Something does come to my mind, and I know we have some places, like the bathrooms, like there's the sensor, right, that it can sense, for water, or it can sense for the soap. And some places like where I work at, it opens the doors, right, it senses your hand there. um but it isn't always, right? um and so if a white person were to be using this sensor, and then like all of a sudden it doesn't work, right, or just they just show up and it doesn't work, um odds are that the person would say, "Oh, this is just broken. They need to fix it." Right? It's not recognizing me. It's not recognizing my hand. So therefore, it must be broken. Which, like, right? It's understandable. Um, but and I've seen this before, right? And there's times where it's changed, but it's still there. Um, when people of color would use the exact same sensor, and it doesn't work. And I would be willing to bet that these people do not think that this thing is broken and it needs to be fixed, right? Well, it does, right? It does need to be fixed, and it is broken. But the reason why it doesn't work is because when this sensor was being created, it included some people and it excluded others, right? These sensors don't work for darker skin. Um, and so what message does that send? That sends a message that, hey, when we were putting all this effort in the design of this technology, we were doing research design, and we implemented, and we included all these people, and we thought of many things, but one thing we didn't think about were people of color, right? And so people of color realize this. They see it, right? And what messages is that? What message is being sent to them? That the message is, you're not included, right? And so that is oppression, and that is privilege. And again, I understand that it can be difficult to see and hear it, but there are places and spaces where it is very obvious. And there's sometimes where it can be not as obvious, but it is always there. And so that's the sort of example, and that example is a very it is a very tiny aspect of a much larger system, right? Um, so think about this, all right? So we have this white supremacy culture that instills values, and it creates a lens, right? The lens at which we view things, view ourselves. And when people are creating things, and this kind of goes back to, the sort of the example that I had, when we are creating anything, when we're creating music, when we're creating art, when we're creating projects, when we're creating these things, a part of ourself can be seen, right? So when we hear music, when we see art, excuse me, I am having a rough go at it. I'm gonna need some of this tea. There we go. So when we're creating things, anything, a part of ourself can be seen in whatever we're creating. So if you see art pieces, you can kind of see by the color, designs, the texture, right? You can kind of get a glimpse into this person's world. Um, and when you hear music, right, you can kind of they're sharing their experience. You can kind of get a glimpse of where they're at in their life at a particular time when they created this, right? And so that's the lens. That's the lens at which they view the world, view themselves. And so the same things happen when we are creating anything, when we're creating programs, when we are creating books, when we're creating learning modules, when we are creating different rules, laws, legislations, when we're creating different buildings, structures, when we are trying to create communities, schools, when any time what we're creating it, the lens at which these people that created them, their how they viewed things are there, right? And so that's how um, things are perpetuated. Sometimes when people are creating, anything, sometimes it's unintentional, and sometimes it is intentional, and everywhere in between. But that's sort of like another example, right, of how white supremacy culture just gets perpetuated over and over and over again, it um, and it changes, right? And it changes because you have movements like Black Lives Matter that are shedding light on a very obvious issue, and then people try to change, but it just ends up looking a little different. Um, so that's the gist of what I wanted to talk about. Other thing I wanted to chat about. So an aspect of white supremacy culture that's not on this little pamphlet that I intend on sharing is control and power. So I feel as though that one value that gets passed on is, you know, control and power, and of the sense that an individual has power, and the sense that a particular group has control and power. And the reality is that we have very little control. And I'm just saying this in general. We have very little control in things, and yet anyone tries to do and say things to give us our sense of control. I know for me personally, I mean, that was an aspect of addiction, is, I just felt like a lot of things were out of my control. Um, and, I desperately wanted to do anything, whatever that could give me a sense that I was in control of things. Um, and then in recovery, you kind of realize that, you really you don't have control over a lot. What we do have control over is letting go. We have control over letting go of old thoughts, old ideas, old views of things. We have control of letting go of resentments, right? It's a big part of 12-step and 12-step programs. We have so our control is actually in the fact that we can let go, and when we let go, there is a newfound freedom in things, and accepting that we are not in control of a whole lot is there's a lot of peace, and there's a lot of serenity. We're not in control of what other people do, what other people say. We're only in control of our own thoughts, and what kind of thoughts that we have. And anxiety can come from anxiety and depression, right? Can come from when we can get stuck in the future or the past. Which is why, for me, mindfulness is a big part of my growth, and being in the present moment, and allows me to get some relief. And the more and more I do it, the more I'm aware, right? The more I'm aware of right, my thoughts, what I'm doing, what I'm saying. Um, you know, again, kind of going back to the values of white supremacy culture, when when we can let go of some of these things and engage in activities like mindfulness, we get to open up our awareness. And when we, sort of take the blinders off, or sort of broaden them or widen them wider and wider, then we have a much more we have a much healthier perspective of the world and ourselves. And the more awareness we have, the more we can let go of fear, and the more we can change, the more we can accept ourselves, and the more we can accept other people. The more we accept other people, the more acceptance we have for ourselves, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. So I think that's it. I think that's where I'm gonna sort of pause things. So we talked about white supremacy culture, what it is, gets passed on, values, what it can do, right? Limit awareness, right? And the values they perpetuate, and they maintain a sort of way of life, which is maintains privilege and maintains oppression. And talked about how that when we let go of some of these values and we do change, we white people, right, or benefit from it. Talked about control and power. We have very little control over things, but when we do let go, when we do realize that we have we're in control of letting go, then we do get a sense of power. The other thing that I kind of want to mention, and I feel like this happens a whole lot, is I hear this a lot, and like I used to say this a lot too. I would say things like, "Oh, that person made me mad. That person irritated me. That person frustrated me." And I hear this a lot with being triggered. Like, "Oh, that person triggered me. Or I got triggered by that." And it's like, yes and no. Because all right, if we do say those things, what we are saying is that person, that thing, has control over me, right? If that person made me have an emotional experience, and if that thing made me, then I'm saying, okay, I'm giving you control. You control how I feel. If I'm doing that about certain things or certain things I'm viewing, I'm sort of handing over control to that person or that thing. And when I hand over control, I'm handing over power. And when I started to realize that, hey, I'm the one, like these emotional experiences are coming from my thoughts, right? And it has very little to do with my external experiences. There's a reason, right, that we have them, right? And it's a lot of times because of our past experiences and, right, projections of our past, or, it can project of how we, maybe feel about ourselves. But ultimately, it's us, right? We are the ones in control of our thoughts. At times it might not feel like it, but we do. We are in control of our thoughts, and our thoughts create emotional experiences. And our emotional experiences can change behavior, and that is CBT. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because that's an important, another important aspect, or something that I've seen and heard a lot, and something that I've also I used to experience and used to feel like that my external experience dictated my internal one, and that's not true. Our thoughts do. So be aware of your thoughts, right? Challenge your thoughts, challenge your beliefs. When we challenge our beliefs and challenge our thoughts, it's like the healthiest thing that we can do, because honestly, what comes from it is either we get a better understanding of whatever it is that our belief is, or we kind of realize that it's not true. So either way, when you challenge your thoughts, when you challenge your beliefs, the outcome is positive, right? Right? If you challenge it, either like, oh man, like, yes, this is true, or right, maybe this is something that's not true and I need to let go of, right? But either way, you benefit from it. So that's another thing that I wanted to throw out there. I feel like the more and more I talk, the more and more I'm gonna want to say stuff, and I should probably stop. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to chat about. But I really want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? If you want, or not, if you want, like, I really want to hear from you. I really want to hear about your experiences. About maybe something I chatted about, or just like anything in general. Something, something in life that you've, in which you felt like you've changed and grew from. Um, Anything at all, you can reach out to me in the comment section. You can reach out to me on email. Got to first pull up the email because I gotta make sure I give the right one. Email is thisthingcalledlife7@gmail.com. And there's also a website that is still under, well, it's out there, but like needs a little work. And that website is it's this thing called life.center. Yes. It's this thing called life.center. So you can go on there, and I'm pretty sure you can, like, there's I'm going to put this YouTube video on there. There should be ways that you can contact me, I hope. I'm still trying to figure it out. But you can put, you can say something in the comment section. But the best way, I feel like, is reaching out by email at this thing called life7 at gmail.com. So, yeah, moving forward. This is great, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being with me. And, going to try to do this every week. So, have a wonderful Friday. Today's actually Thursday, but I'll probably post this on Friday. Have a wonderful Friday, a weekend, and thank you for being with me on this thing called life.